I picked up a woman at a bar, took her home. We were drinking beer a lot that day. Took her home. I thought I was going to get lucky. Comments were made and different things, and an altercation happened, and I struck her.
Keith Jesperson was born April 6, 1955 in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. He was the middle child of 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Both his father and grandfather were abusive alcoholics. He didn't drink. Both he and his wife, Rose, decided they didn't want to drink. Both of their families had a history of alcohol abuse. Keith was growing into a tall man, and in school he started to get teased for it. His brothers even joined in calling him Igor, or Ig for short. Because of the teasing, he was very introverted and painfully shy. This upset his father, who beat him in front of others for it and for other various reasons. His father would even electrocute him. He was treated less than his siblings and was required to pay for housing longer than his siblings did. Despite all of this, he had dreams of becoming a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. Starting as early as 5 years old, he would abuse neighborhood animals. When his father would see him torturing these animals, he would cheer him on and later would even brag about it to his friends. Keith would walk around the trailer park where he lived, snatching up dogs and harming birds. Keith continued to hurt animals into adulthood. He started to wonder what it would be like to do these horrible things to a human. When he was 10 years old, he had a friend he would often get into trouble with. The friend blamed Keith for a lot of things Keith didn't do. Finally, Keith was fed up and started to beat him, trying to kill him, but his father pulled him off of him. A year after that, a boy held Keith underwater until he blacked out, and later Keith tried drowning him until a lifeguard pulled him away. Keith was also a bit of an arsonist and would set things on fire. Keith claimed to have been raped at the age of 14, but there is no other information about the sex of his attacker or how or where it happened. Also in high school, Keith sustained a frontal lobe injury when climbing a rope in gym class and falling 25 feet to the floor. Why wasn't there a padded mat on the gym floor? This is an injury that would later prevent him from becoming a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. Frontal lobe injuries can completely alter someone's personality, especially when it occurs at a young age. The frontal lobe is responsible for giving us the ability to know the difference between right and wrong, and it allows us to understand that actions have consequences. Damaging the frontal lobe can cause that person to be more irritable, also causing sudden mood changes and the inability to regulate behavior. What's known as our executive function could be affected with the frontal lobe injury. So anticipation, goal selection, planning, initiation, sequencing, monitoring, and self-correction all become difficult. As we know, many serial killers have frontal lobe injuries. I just talked about Richard Ramirez in my last Claws and Crime episode, who had 2 severe head injuries before 5 years old that knocked him out and caused concussions requiring multiple stitches. Keith's father told him to not even think about going to college because he would fail anyway. So a year after graduating high school, he became a truck driver, and a year after that, he married Rose Huck. He still had plans to apply to become a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. He met Rose at a burger joint where she served him a burger with no patty at the drive-thru window. He circled back around and after getting his order fixed, asked her out. She said no. Whenever he came back, he would always ask her out again, and she would continue to tell him no. She says she wasn't attracted to him. She doesn't even know why she married him at all. He later also says that he cared for her, but he was never in love with her. Finally, a friend convinces her to go on a date with him. Keith started cheating on Rose the day they got married. While taking her bridal photos, Keith was somewhere making out with one of the bridesmaids. The bridesmaid finally told Rose years later, hoping to relieve herself of guilt. Early on in the marriage, Rose would get calls every day from women looking for Keith, claiming to be his girlfriend. When they would find out Rose was his wife, they'd hang up. She confronted him about it one day, and he just replied with, "If only you knew." Keith's father, Les, was also a bit creepy with Rose in Keith's presence. They would be sitting right next to each other, and Les would touch Rose and ask her if she's sleeping with him tonight. When Rose became pregnant with their first kid is when Keith decided that Rose was off limits. They had their first child in 1975, Melissa. While Melissa recalls having a good memory of her father as a child, there were 3 incidences where it seemed he may have tried to kill her and her mother the year she was born. The first incident was a fire where the roof of the trailer they were living in was engulfed in flames after a bathroom vent that had been taped up by Keith caught fire. Keith was nowhere to be found. 3 months later, Keith got a contract job to the irrigation pipes at a huge orchard field with tall, dry grass. While hanging out in the RV, Rose could see a line of fire heading toward her and Melissa. She put Melissa in the lake as she got the hose and with the grass around the RV in case the fire reached their campsite. Luckily, the fire department showed up before the fire reached them, and Keith came back 15 minutes later. It was after this incident that Rose regretted marrying Keith. She said she had this feeling that a dark force was out to get her and Melissa, and that dark force was Keith. Before an interview in 2018, Rose didn't know that Keith was an arsonist. A month later, they had all gone camping in the woods. Keith had cleaned some fish that day and decided to sleep in the car. While Rose and Melissa slept in the cabin, Rose heard 2 bears outside their door. The door was weak and at any moment the bears could have entered the cabin. Keith knew all there was about camping and outdoor living, so to clean fish outside the cabin was in Rose's mind deliberate. Rose ends up having 2 more kids with Keith. Finally, one day, Rose had had enough. She went on the road with him in a semi while the kids stayed with their grandparents. They pulled over to eat at a restaurant in Arizona, and there were what she calls 2 pimps washing their limo hanging outside the restaurant. He picks Rose up off the ground and puts her into the arms of one of the guys and says, "You can have her," and walked away. She says she doesn't know why she even got back in the truck with him, but they drove home in silence, and in her mind, the marriage was over. They were divorced in 1990 when Melissa was 10 years old. Rose took her 3 kids to her parents' house, and they lived on welfare in their basement. His first victim was Tanya Bennett, who was extremely sweet and developmentally slow. He met her at a bar where she had been drinking wine coolers and beers for several hours. He invited her over to the house he was renting, but when she refused to have sex with him, he punched her in the face. He says for some reason he just kept on hitting her. While looking at her beat-up face, he feared going to jail for bodily injury and decided to kill Tanya to cover up the assault. After beating, raping, and strangling her to death with his bare hands, he went back to the bar to establish an alibi, making sure to make conversation with people there. He dumped her body later that night and was back on the road the next morning. Her body was found a few days later. Once news broke out about Tanya Bennett, strangely, a woman called police with a false confession saying that her boyfriend was the one who committed the murder. She even went as far as planting fake evidence and said he forced her to help him rape, murder, and dispose of the body. She thought this would be an opportunity to get her abusive boyfriend locked up. However, she ended up getting locked up too. The boyfriend pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. Keith finds out that these people have taken credit for his murder, and this upsets him, so he writes a confession in a bathroom stall at a truck stop and signs it with a smiley face. He also wrote letters to media outlets and police departments letting them know that he was the actual murderer of Tanya Bennett and signs them all with a happy face. Thus, he's dubbed the Happy Face Killer. The police at first don't pay these letters any mind because they were sure they had the right people and that the person writing these letters were just trying to distract them. Keith would end up being charged for the murder of 8 women, although he claims to have killed over 160 people. He raped and strangled them all to death. He said he strangled the first victim and said he just kept doing that with each victim after that. Most of his victims were prostitutes or transients. Cynthia Lynn Wilcox was his 3rd victim, and he killed her over a parking spot. Lori Ann Petlin was a prostitute and was his 4th victim. He says she got in his truck and was trying to make him feel bad for her, talking about how her life was so miserable. He said to her, "Well, I can kill you and put you out of your misery." Not realizing he was dead serious, she responds with, "Go for it." And so he did. He killed her. In 1995, he met Angela Subrees at a bar in Spokane, Washington, who would become his 7th victim. She asked him for a ride across a couple of states, and they spent a few days together. He even let her use his credit card when she needed it. One day, they got into a fight, which led him to rape and strangle her per his MO. This time, he decided to tie her to the bottom of his truck, face down, and drove for miles in an attempt to remove any identifying features. His 2nd, 5th, and 6th victims are all Jane Does. Dawn Slagle is the only known survivor of Keith Jesperson, her and her 4-month-old son. Her interaction with Keith happened months after the killing of Tanya. One night, she had gotten into an argument with her then husband and left the house with her 4-month-old baby and went to a shopping center. She could feel Keith staring at her and hoped that he wouldn't walk over to her. Sure enough, he did. He starts to tell her about how he and his wife are also going through problems and that he misses his kids. This softens her up a bit and she has to use the bathroom, so she asks him to go for a ride in his truck. They go just outside of town at a rest area, and when she returns to the truck after using the bathroom, he immediately gets out of the truck and is gone for a long while. He finally returns, but instead of reversing out of the wooded area, he goes in deeper. He then starts to attack Dawn, slamming her head as she's being knocked around in the truck. He had his hands around Dawn's neck and she felt like he was trying to break her neck, not just strangle her. Her baby fell to his feet by the pedals, and he attempted to crush the baby's skull by pressing hard on them. Finally, she tried to get in his head and started yelling at him. "What are you trying to do? What are you trying to even do?" over and over again. Finally, he gives up. Dawn recalls seeing him go through a sort of metamorphosis back to the man she had originally met earlier that evening. It was like he had become a completely different person in that moment. As they're getting back onto the highway, he turns to her and says, "Don't ever get in the car with somebody you don't know again. It might be the last thing you do." When she got home, she didn't receive any sympathy from her husband, and he put the blame on her, saying she shouldn't have gotten into the car with a strange man and that she deserved it. The cops end up finding Keith and holding him at gunpoint. Her husband kept her from pressing charges, which upset the police, but when she finally was able to call the police back, they told her it was too late. They had let Keith go. This is so unfortunate because catching him at this point would have saved the lives of 7 women. In 1995, his last victim was Julie Ann Winningham, who was said to be his longtime girlfriend. She was also a trucker. Her son, Don, is adamant about the fact that she wasn't his girlfriend, but all sources do say otherwise. Keith says he murdered her because he felt like she was after his money. Keith was brought in for questioning, but the police didn't have any evidence to arrest him with. Knowing that everything he did was eventually going to catch up to him, Keith tried to commit suicide twice. He finally decided to turn himself in, thinking the judge would be easy on him when it came to sentencing. He's currently serving 3 life terms at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. While in custody, Keith began to share all the information he could about the murders. He started to like the attention too much and enjoyed being interviewed about the murders. So much so that the prison staff didn't allow for him to interview in person anymore, only by phone. He spoke very casually about the murders when asked about how he carried them out. In 2009, he was indicted for another murder in Riverside, California, and had to appear in court in California. They convicted him of the murder, which turned his sentence from 3 to 4 life terms. Jesperson was arrested in 1995, but the couple who was convicted in 1990 of his first murder of Tanya Bennett were not released until 1996. Once convicted of a murder in the United States, it is very hard to get it overturned, even with a confession from the person who actually did it and evidence. They both still had the conviction on their record, even though they were exonerated. It's unfortunate that Laverne, the girlfriend, thought this was a good idea because this kept the police from looking for Keith. He might have been caught sooner had they not believed they caught the murderer. Keith's daughter Melissa was 10 years old when her parents divorced, and he was arrested when she was 15. As an adult, she reflects on her childhood and lines it up with the events of the murders. From her point of view, her father was a loving man who doted over his kids. She had hoped her parents would get back together like any other teenager would. Learning about the 2 fires and the bear scare in the woods gives her a completely different image of her father than what she remembers. Between 10 and 15 years old, Melissa recalls her father starting to say inappropriate things to her about his sex life and about how he could get away with murder by doing this or that. At the time, she shrugged it off as her dad just being a sexual guy who liked having porn all over his walls. And because they liked to watch crime shows together, he had these ideas of how to get away with murder. Melissa says she had a very vivid vision of her dad in prison when she was 12 years old. She remembers the feeling that came over her, and she feared for the future of her dad. She didn't tell anyone because she knew nobody would believe her. But before all of this, in elementary school, Melissa witnessed her father torture kittens. She never told this to anyone either because nobody told Keith what to do anyway. He was a really big, commanding man, and he just did whatever the hell he wanted. She also speaks about having a psychic connection with her father. One night, he found her sleeping in the hallway, and when he asked her why she was sleeping out there, she told him it was because she felt people grabbing at her. He told her that he saw them too and to just ignore them and they'll go away. Now, as an adult, she believes that these were the souls of the women he had killed. When her mother told her that Keith had been arrested for murder, Rose didn't give her any other information. She wanted to protect Melissa. So Melissa had to go to the library to find out more about what was going on, and there she found out that he had actually been accused of 8 murders, not just 1. Melissa now dedicates her life to helping victims of violent crimes to come face to face with their abusers to help them overcome their trauma. Melissa herself has met with the family and loved ones of Keith's victims who at first might have had hatred toward Melissa, but now see her separate from her father. She wrote a book in 2008 titled Shattered Silence and was on the Dr. Phil show and Oprah soon after its release. From there, a movie, a podcast special, and other media was put out about her story. She believes her father should be killed for what he has done instead of rotting in prison. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please share it and hit the like button. And I hope I see you next week. On Thursday, I'll be uploading a film review on Tusk, and Friday, I'll be uploading a spooky story narration. And if you want to join the Rainbow Fright Freight Train, go ahead and hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell. That way you'll get notified every Thursday and Friday when I post more videos like this. Well, alright y'all. Please stay safe. Peace.